Welcome
Got
to
it.
the Institute for Advanced Astonishment. I'm going to skip the intro. This is the first time in a while. And basically, this is a podcast where we try to be as useful as possible without all the stories and talk and get right to the point. And that's why we're getting right to Martin Ball, Dr. Martin Ball. Welcome, Martin, for the second time. I think you're the first return guest on the Institute for Advanced Astonishment.
Woohoo. And I said this last time, but I love the name. It's so awesome. The Institute for Advanced Astonishment is
So glad.
it's just great. It's perfect.
Yes, yes. Not amazement, because I don't know if you know my story, but I studied with the amazing Randy since I was 19. And
Yeah.
so I had to move from amazement to astonishment.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just like, dude, you're like could have been my stuff, man.
Were you a
No
fan of
amazement for
Randy
you.
when you were in your atheist days? Do you remember Randy?
No,
James?
just the name. Yeah.
Yeah. He fought like Uri Geller and a lot of the false psychics and faith healers. But
Yeah.
what he
Yeah.
missed was this non-dual. He totally missed it. Totally
Well,
missed
it's easy to miss. I mean, when you think about how the whole system is actually set up to deceive us, that we are the ones deceiving ourselves from this non-dual perspective, and that's kind of the whole point, so that we are thoroughly 100% invested in our individuated sense of self, because that's what brings a sense of meaning, purpose, satisfaction, pleasure, pain, all the rest of that. So, the cards are stacked against us. It's like there's this tremendous sleight of hand that's taking place. And I always do like to say that the job of the ego, which is the individuated sense of self, its job ultimately is to convince God that it's not God. So
it.
it's got to be really, really sophisticated. And that's where, you know, this is what the atheists miss. And I think you and I, we both missed this when we were younger and when we were atheists, is that
Yes.
what we're doing is we're looking at religion and it's like, oh man, I can poke this thing so full of holes. I mean, that's not a problem. That's not difficult. Um, but if you're not looking at the deep phenomenological experience of non-duality, which doesn't arise just naturally for most people, it's got to be something that you're seeking out in some
Yes.
capacity. And you've got to be willing to go through that really radical ontological shock that gets presented. So it's understandable that any kind of skeptic would miss it because they're not really looking for experience, but they're looking at, can we correlate factual data with the claims of religion? And there, it's like we're batting zero, right? It's
Yes.
really easy at that level.
I love ontological shock. That's
Yeah.
great. I love that. And I think of Schopenhauer as you met my cat. He just jumped up. Schopenhauer said, the philosopher said, truth is no whore that just throws herself on you. You
Yeah.
have to really seek it out. And even when you seek it, it isn't, it ain't easy, even when you
Yeah.
seek it.
Yeah. And I would say for myself, in agreement with the Buddhist position, that there does need to be that bodhicitta, that sense of the awakening of the possibility, Buddhahood, of some kind of enlightenment or some kind of access to deeper truth. But that the further you get within that quest, that actually the seeking in and of itself becomes an obstacle. Because what is it that is seeking? That the thing that is seeking cannot find what it's trying to find because it's actually in the way, because it's actually the revelation of truth is a falling away of all agency, all attempt at making meaning, all attempt at understanding, so that it can arise from within our experience. But you can't, that's why you can't make it happen. And you can't just read enough books, or you can't just study enough stuff and then like, oh, I got it. That the real realization of the true nature of being has to come from an inner experience that is accompanied by a form of letting go and dissolution.
What do you call it? Took me a while to get that, and then I got it. But when I would say, all right, I'm going to stop this, I'm going to, and my teacher would say, who was a big fan of yours, would say, no, that's still ego when you say, but it felt like when I declared it, maybe it didn't happen right away, but it would take about a month or two, and then it would happen. So do you think that's sort of what they call grace or something, where you declare it, but maybe it's already in action, it's already happening and falling away. But I would declare no more this. And then, of course, it would be a week of this, 2 weeks, three, and then it would fall away. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that taking that step of actually verbalizing something um,
Yes.
it's just a step along the way. It's not that it quote unquote accomplishes something specific other than, well, I've been having this idea inside, or I've been having this feeling, and now by speaking it out loud, it's
Yes.
almost like we're now committing to that in some way, or committing to the
Yes.
possibility that that could be the case. So it opens, it's again, it's all kind of this sleight of hand. It's all these magic tricks. And so by stating that intention that I'm going to let this fall away, that it's kind of like at that point, some part of yourself is going to hold yourself accountable to that.
Right.
And so you're just making it more possible that it might happen. But it gets confusing when people say, well, so I said it, so I'm the one who did it. It's like, well, no, because that is the ego still trying to claim
Yes.
responsibility or agency for this thing that actually is beyond the ego's control. But
I
it's
totally
the
agree.
game. Yeah.
As a atheist, I was a big fan of the brain, and I was obsessed with the brain.
Brains. Yeah,
It was
brains.
all the brain, and I would think of concepts of free will, and it seemed like sort of what you're saying. It would be like I would declare something like I want a hamburger instead of a hot dog. I want this, and really, even back then, it was like a board meeting, and the false self of the ego was looking in, seeing what the board decided, like the board voted hamburger, and then the ego would run and go, hamburger, I want a hamburger. So I got that back way back then, but still I was a long way to this.
Yeah. Yeah. That there's sort of the psychological insight into, well, how's the mind working? How am I observing the different parts of the mind? Where is choice like really coming from? And I think that those are interesting questions, and I think that we can contemplate them. But I do like to push people into what I would call more an experience of embodiment and looking at um, what is the experience that's arising from within, and that sometimes when like doing integration calls with people or something like that, that sometimes it's very clear, like, okay, you're overthinking, you're thinking too much, you're thinking too much about whether there is free will or whether there isn't free will and where does it come from. And so I do like to kind of put it back on people, like, do you feel that's helping you lead a more grounded and authentic life? And it's usually no, because it's like, no, I'm just thinking about this all the time and I can't come to a good resolution or whatever it is. And so then trying to move people more into a different perception of themselves or what their experience is and maybe where they're focusing their attention. But they're fun to think about.
Now I know you probably don't want to answer a metaphysical question like the Buddha didn't talk, but I
Okay,
just
here
had
it is.
one
Yeah.
one question, and then we'll get into it. What How would you, and I can go first, but I'll throw it to you. What would you say is going on here on Earth? Like it's a simple one. What we're thrown into this sort of what you would say, maybe you would agree with Saint Augustine, who said God becomes human so that humans can become God. It's almost, but you might not agree with that, or a little bit like it's an unveiling of your true nature as the pure everything. So how would you describe what's happening here? Only if you
Well,
want to answer it.
sure. Um, I would pretty much be in agreement with that statement. Um, but I also do try and stay away from any teleological statements of like, this is the purpose of where it's going, that this is like the intended outcome or the intended eventual resolution. Like, in other words, is there a plan? What's the point? And when I usually counter that with like, this is the point, the experience that's happening right now. This is the point. There's not an end point, an end game. And this experience of the potential of waking up to the reality that there is only God, that we are God, that's what's going on here. I do like to, I've framed that as sort of an evolutionary potential that, you know, back in 2009, when I wrote my book, Being Human, that was kind of the first place where I described humans in general through the egoic perspective as being God toddlers. And
Right.
I I was of the position that I'd like it if more people actually like grew up a little bit so that we could be God adults and interact with each other more rationally and clearly about what is the nature of being and who we really are. But the interesting thing about that is that definitely the ego is an evolutionary product, but it doesn't, that final maturation does not seem to be baked into the system. I mean, in other words, we're all going to hit puberty whether we want to or not, regardless of what we do or don't do. We're going to hit puberty. And those of us who are in our later years, whether we want to or not, the hair's going to gray, the hair's going to thin, you know, we're going to get a little bit fatter, we're going to get slower, we're going to get achier, then we're all going to die sooner or later. We don't have any agency around any of those things. Like it's just going to happen, that this is part of the natural life cycle and evolution of these relatively hairless primates. But that final stage of waking up and really realizing the true nature of the self, the true nature of reality, it's not imposed upon reality in any way, shape, or form. So it's interesting that it is sort of an evolutionary potential. And I do think that that is an exciting potential for the universal consciousness. It's like, yeah, can I get so far in that I can even know that it's me that's in me and that's like all that there is? And that's because that's my own awakening and transformation had those qualities to it. It was like, yeah, finally, like I'm here as me, like this is awesome. So I think that energy is there, but it's not a metaphysical requirement. It's not necessitated in any way. And so maybe there is when we're getting to what is the ultimate free will. Like the ultimate free will could possibly be, do I choose to realize my true nature, giving up my false identity, and come to this rather mature place of understanding that there is one universal consciousness and that that's what I am and everybody else is. And that those other aspects of the statement, that reality is God becoming reality. In other words, if God didn't do it, nobody else here to do it. So this is where all of the phenomenal universe comes from, is this being interacting with itself energetically and transforming itself over billions and billions and billions of years. And I do think that part of that was so that there could be this evolutionary process of the origins of life and then the origins of quote unquote intelligent, sentient life forms such as humans, and that all living beings are vehicles through which this universal consciousness can experience itself through the dynamics of self and other, of me and not me. And that also is very satisfying to this consciousness because it gets to participate in shared experience that way. Whereas in the totality of unitary being, you know, there's no one else there to share anything with. So I do think that that's a driving factor for, you know, why is there something rather than nothing? Well, it's so God could experience itself as all these multiple forms of reality and get to be supernovas and subatomic particles and amoebas and human beings. That's kind of a driving force there. But again, that last step of actual self-realization, that we as, because here's the thing is that I like to say that God doesn't actually make rules around behavior other than what we would call physics, chemistry, you know, second law of thermodynamics, things like that. But God would never force itself to do anything. And so as the individuated, embodied perspectives that we are, nothing is going to force us to wake up and realize that, oh, it really is all one, and that there actually is a theological nature to reality, but it doesn't have anything to do with what religions have ever said. So I always like to make that distinction clear as well.
I love that. And
So how would you answer it? You said you had an answer.
It's pretty close. My answer is God, or in my atheist days, pure imagination, or whatever you want to call God, pure imagination, say, well, this endless something um, seems to go to sleep, seems to, and when it does, or maybe I could just say anything, right? This is impossible to say, but I'll try. Um, this endless everything just seems to forget, like a king forgetting that it's rich, and because that's the one thing that would, and has a dream, sort of a nightmare, that it's poor and it's lost and it's split into everything from, like you said, birds, dogs, humans, and I think you said supernovas. It's the whole thing,
Yeah.
and then it gets, and that's the garden where it plays hide and seek, and then it wakes up and realizes, oh, I'm first it realizes there's something, and then it realizes it is the something, and then it realizes it is the whole thing, and then you can return to. I've been returning to the religion for fun. So I was such a rabid atheist. And so it's fun to go back and go, oh, it was there, but clouded with all that dualism. And, it's fun to look back and see that it was there, but maybe I blocked it or the priest blocked it. I don't know. But it's there if you look deep, and you read it symbolically. So I
Yeah.
think it's that.
Yeah. And, just with religions, I think that there are a lot of kernels of truth within all of these things. But
Huh.
what happens, though, is that religions ultimately are forms of identity. They're forms of individuated identity and also group identity. And so a large part of religion is about how do we function as beings within a society or within a collective. And there we do get the expression of a lot of egoic preferences, like, well, women should have their hair covered.
Right.
God wants you to do this. And like, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Okay.
Right.
Or
Don't eat
God
pork.
wants,
Don't
yeah,
eat
God
pork.
wants you to be poor. God wants you to be starving, or God wants you to, cut off your foreskin or whatever. And that's where it all falls apart for me. And so that, yeah, there are these nuggets of truth. And that's why all religions have had their mystics and those who are seeking
Yes.
after, what's really going on here. And they're often condemned as being heretics or, apostates because when the deeper you go, the more you realize like most of this stuff within my quote unquote religion, that it's great if we just want to focus on how are we going to be in society? How are we going to relate to each other? How are we going to identify? How are we going to dress? How are we going to associate? How are we going to make meaning? And then, of course, as human beings, we are prone to symbolic meaning making and communication. That's I think it's just part of our biological hardwiring that we are attuned to, like, oh, somebody just put his hand on my head and well, that really meant something. And now this person's wearing fancy clothes and they're doing it, and now it really means something, that we are primed for symbolic acts as these smart primates. And so religions are filled with all of this stuff. And this gives people a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, comfort that maybe they're doing the right thing, or anxiety that maybe they're doing the wrong thing. And so it governs our behavior and our thoughts and the way that we express ourselves and interact with each other. And some of that's great because, it's better than chaos, I suppose, for human beings. But they're not, that's about social systems and what I like to call the meta ego, which is not just the individual ego, but the ego of being part of a group identity. And then what does it mean to be part of that group? And so mostly religions are talking about these meta egos, which I think is fascinating. I mean, I love studying
Yeah.
religion, history, culture, all of that stuff. But I study it so that I can learn about humans, not so I can learn about reality.
And you taught, I don't know if you're still teaching it or you taught it for many years, right?
Yeah, I am not teaching anymore because I am a casualty of
COVID.
COVID. Yeah, that for about 10 or 11 years, I was teaching religion at Southern Oregon University. So that's right here in Ashland. And um, They don't have a religion department. Actually, over the years that I taught at SOU, so this is like endemic among the humanities in general, that when I first started teaching at SOU, there was a philosophy department, and they taught classes in religion in the philosophy department, which is interesting. Most philosophy departments were like,
Right.
ooh, religion, ooh, you've got cooties, go away. But anyway, they were teaching, they had me teaching in philosophy, and then philosophy got combined with, it became philosophy, English, and writing department. And then it was the philosophy, English, writing, anthropology, and sociology department. And I don't even know what it is now, but basically all the humanities got collapsed into one thing. And yeah, I was teaching introduction to world religion courses. And since there is no major of religion at SOU, all my classes were just electives. And so basically I was first on the chopping block of
Yeah.
where the enrollment is down, funds are down, we've got to cut classes, we've got to cut salaries. Who do we go to? And that got me. So it's been a few years now since I've actively been teaching in the university, but I always
I would
loved it.
I would have loved to have sat in one of those classes. And
Well,
that
it
makes me
was,
think of when I first 2009 is when I had a first experience, and without the medicine, and then 4 years later MDMA and silent darkness, and 2 years after that LSD and silent darkness, and on, but I just wanted to tell you that in 2009 my teacher was a big fan of yours, and he would, just to show from, I like to show, I can imagine people who are reluctant to take the medicine right now. I'm thinking of them on the fence, or they think it's a shortcut, or they think whatever. So I just wanted to expose myself. In 2009, I had this experience. And even then, in 2009, 10, 11, 12, my teacher from Oregon, big fan of yours, would say, listen to Martin and give me the podcast. And he'd send me the link. And I would not, and this is after the experience, I would click sometimes, sometimes not. I could feel a resistance to the
yeah,
medicine still, because I hadn't taken it yet. And once 2013 came, the gates opened on the medicine, but I still wouldn't say it as much. It took a few years, and maybe LSD broke that down. And by 2016, I wrote a book and I said medicine, but it took years to get there. So I just wanted to confess that, and and because I know there's someone listening that they're on the fence, or they have some kind of taboo against taking this astonishment medicine, whether it's DMT or MDMA or LSD or something. And what would you say to them? Someone on the fence, or someone that maybe, I want to include everyone, someone that maybe took it once, but now they're reluctant. They think they're beyond it. They took it
yeah,
one time and they
yeah,
got it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Um, well, there's just a whole variety of ways that I respond to that. One is that um, they work. At heart, I'm a pragmatist. Like if something works, like go for it. And that's the thing, is that psychedelic medicines, they do work in really profound ways. And that if you are interested in this process of waking up or liberation or self-realization, whatever you want to characterize it or describe it, like these are the tools to do that. And it's interesting that when we look at traditional cultures and traditional religions, and the history of religions and spirituality, pretty much all goes back to the use of these
Yes.
plants and substances. I think, when I was a graduate student, that was a much iffier statement to make. So that was back in the mid to late 90s. That there wasn't as much evidence that was available out there. But I think at this point that it's so undeniable. So sometimes, you get people who are, maybe they've come from a religious tradition, and they might feel some resistance to well, don't tell me I'm gonna like take a drug and find God. Like I'm gonna go and read the Torah. I'm gonna go to the mosque or whatever it is.
Right. It's a shortcut,
Um,
or
yeah, and say, oh, it's a shortcut. But now that we have like the clear evidence, like, look, actually, the priests, the rabbis, the imams, I mean, the Buddhas, they've all been doing this, and it's been around for a long, long time. And even if it were a shortcut, what's
why not
wrong with
take
a
it?
shortcut?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, shortcuts are better than long ways.
Yeah. I mean, why beat around
I
the bush?
asked I asked David Hopmeister, and I'm glad he gave me a great answer. The head of the Course in Miracles, and I asked him when he went to India, and I said, "Did you swim?" And he went, "Wow." I said, "Did you swim to India?" "Oh, you took a plane. You took the better technology." And
Yeah.
I said, "What about the medicine?" And he quickly was on board. He said, "Anything that gets you there, which was so refreshing because I didn't expect that. Thought he was going to stop me, and he didn't. But shortcut
Yeah.
or the best way to go, a car, a plane, a medicine, whatever works.
Yeah. And in some instances, um, I'm not sure if it's really possible to get all the way there without the medicines in some respect. So, like, if we use an analogy of I want to go to the moon, um, well, I could try and get there on my own. Don't know how I do that. Or I could take a car, I could ride a bike, or take a bus. And like, actually, you need a rocket. If you want to go to the moon, you need a rocket. And these deepest levels of the self that you might need some jet fuel to get there. And even when people, say, oh, well, that's a shortcut or it's cheating, that's usually the expression of some kind of spiritual ego, which says, I want to be able to get there all on my own so I can say, like, oh, yeah. Oh, man, I'm so awesome. I did it all on my own. Um, but the ego is so profoundly resilient and resourceful that, I mean, honestly, when I hear the teachings of a lot of quote unquote spiritual teachers, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way because it's like, oh my God, like just please get out of the way, you know?
Yes.
And when people like you do sometimes get spiritual teachers saying, oh, well, yeah, working with these psychedelics that, they're cheating, they're a back door, they don't take you to the real place. And I want you to meditate for the next 40 years and you'll get there on your own. And it's like, well, okay. I mean, if you want to play that game, you can go play that game. But again, just from a practical phenomenological perspective, they work. So I think that that is undeniable. And for anybody to say that your awakening experience on a psychedelic is less than if you like did it on your own or had a spontaneous experience, it's usually actually the other way around, in the sense that I've talked to many, 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 many people from all around the world, from all walks of life. I mean, this is what I do on a daily basis. This is what I do. And I have not yet ever talked to anyone who had an awakening experience all on their own, which happens a lot of times just kind of accidentally, not that people were seeking it, but just sort of like one day I woke up and it was like everything was me and I didn't know what to do. But then when it comes to like an experience of 5-MeO DMT, everybody says, well, yeah, I had an awakening earlier, but it wasn't like that. I mean, that was something else, so that there are these shades and degrees and levels of how deeply we wake up. And so there's things that I call like the experience of non-duality within duality, and then there's non-duality light, and then there's like radical non-duality. And those are just like really generic terms that I use to describe like these shades of experience. But the energetic power of say something like 5-MeO DMT, that's rocket fuel. Now we're not talking about I'm going to pedal my bike around the block and hope I get there sooner or later. Like this is high powered jet fuel. And that's where it has this potential that, again, that the human ego is so resilient and resourceful that it will do everything it can to continually reconfigure and coalesce and make sure that everything is running according to its plan. And sometimes we do need to just like pull the rug out from underneath um, the ego, and that's what 5-MeO does in spades. And then energetically, it becomes this embodied experience where you're feeling in every molecule of your being is just vibrating in this unitary sense of unconditional love and pure consciousness and pure presence and awareness. That's hard to beat. And so if it's a shortcut, it's like good, because especially
Good.
when you look at the world these days, it's like
Yeah.
I wish more people would come from the position of we're all one and we're all profoundly equal, because really what we see is the rabid rise of just toxic partisanship, of dehumanizing othering that's happening just across spectrums and around the world. And we're all ready to kill each other for it, and it's stupid. And this is where again, I'll go back to the statement. I would like people to evolve beyond being God toddlers. They're just like, I want to get what I want, to, oh my God, we are all God. This is it. There is no higher power that's going to come and save us or like fix our shit for us, because we are that. So we have to take responsibility for who we are. We have to embody that, and we have to live that in this state of recognition that we are all unique expressions of this one universal consciousness and being, but that we are all fundamentally equal because we're all the same. Each and every one of us is God in disguise. And
Yes.
most of us don't even know it. So we're coming from a very confused place about who and what we actually are. And I think that if more people were to come from this non-dual space of recognition that, okay, you are leading a different life than me. You have a different name than me. You have a different body than me. You have a different experience and different perspectives and different thoughts. But the thing that's animating me and my whole experience is the same thing that's animating you and your experience. And so at that level, we are the same. We are no different. And that is both elevating living beings and also radically equalizing all living beings, because it also means that no one is more holy than anybody else. No one's got, no one's religion or tradition is more holy or correct than anybody else's, because it's all just coming from the confused ego. And so this is where it's just this radical recognition of reality, and that the job is to be here responsibly and authentically.
I agree. And hurting anyone is hurting yourself, because
Yeah.
it's just that one.
Yeah.
Do you, one more metaphysical, do
Yeah.
you,
Hit
do
me.
you, do you,
I love it.
do you think that there's a chance that I mean, I'm driving towards it as hard as I can. Is there a chance that there could be a full worldwide wake up? And if we hit a threshold, or is that immature? That we hit a threshold of enough medicine, enough awareness, enough mystics, and 30%, 40, and it starts to, and we actually see everyone see it, or is that just bullshit? Medicine plus technology plus VR plus AI plus something, a slow drip DMT, something where everyone gets it and the whole thing ends and it pops.
Well, that would just be the beginning, really,
What?
right? That would be the beginning of what's actually possible in these embodied forms. So it wouldn't be the end of the story. That actually, it's like we haven't even gotten to the beginning yet, that we've been, because again, we've just been running around as toddlers. My view, blah, 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 my culture, my perspective, my religion, my book, blah, 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 blah. So we haven't even hit the point where there's like a crucial number of people who are really realizing like, oh, actually, this is it. And so let's make it now that we are here. Um, I certainly hope for that. I mean, that pipe
It's not
dream.
immature. It's not utopian, or like it's maybe part of the evolution to go that way. It's not silly
No,
to
I don't think
want
it's
that.
silly. I think that there's, again, it's kind of going back to that early metaphysical question, that there is no inherent trajectory within reality that says that it's going to happen or even that it should happen. But I think that because we are essentially free agents. So we are free to ignore it or we are free to go towards it. And that I do think that we are seeing more people, and this is what's really exciting about the psychedelic medicines, and in particular 5-MeO DMT, which is really the key to all of this, is that more and more people are learning about it, more and more people are having the experience, and more people are looking to integrate it into their daily lives as this is now a profound truth that I've encountered. So now how do I live from that place and not just put it as, whoa, that was a mind-blowing experience. So I think that the potential for some kind of radical transformation and awakening, I think that it's there. But at the same time that all this is happening, we're seeing cult leaders take over national stages and people participating in mass delusions. So like there's a lot of factors going in the other direction. And it's kind of like, I mean, maybe we can learn in retrospect, but it's kind of like how some people, when they take a strong psychedelic, their egos just squirm and double down and triple down and quadruple down. That I think maybe to some degree we're seeing that within culture as there are more areas where things are popping into clarity. Um, but even there, as people are popping into clarity, that then people do want to make a religion out of it, or they want to make a temple out of it. And this isn't to criticize anybody who's doing that, because I know people who are doing that. Um, but that's why I'm so interested in, can we just come from it as like, this is reality. We don't need to make a religion out of it. This is not requiring us to pray or worship in any particular way, but it is requiring us to take responsibility for the fact that we are it, and this is it, and it's up to us what we're going to do. And I think that, as you mentioned AI and internet and VR and all that, I think that these are all potential tools that can help in this process. But also there we're seeing, we're supposedly living in the information age, but everybody's living in an information bubble. So people are only spoon feeding themselves the stuff they want to hear. There's a crisis of authority and expertise that is currently happening in at least American culture right now, where you have people who spend their lives studying something and somebody else comes along and says that's just part of your agenda, right? So there's a distrust for people who actually have expertise in matters, and said, well, but my chiropractor told me that this is true, or I saw this on Instagram, so this must be true. And then things like AI. I mean, I'm very interested in AI, but I'll tell you a story about AI in a second. But it can also be used to deceive people. Like it's really bothering me personally right now because I'm a bird photographer, and I've kind of been harping on this on Facebook of like people posting
I
AI
saw that.
birds and like calling it photography and like best photo of the year. And it's like, it's not a fucking photo. Like AI made that. And then everybody's like liking and commenting like, oh, look at God's beautiful creatures. It's not, it's made by AI. So here's the funny story about AI. So I was griping about this on Facebook, and then actually, Facebook now has, or Meta has, Meta AI. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just ask Meta AI. Like, I'll ask, like, why don't you require labels for AI generated content on social media? And then it gave me this whole list of, I said, there don't seem to be any good reasons against labeling. And it gave me all these reasons that maybe labeling is not a good idea. Like it's going to stifle creativity and make people feel that AI content is less worthy. It's like, well, maybe it is. So I got into this whole argument with Meta AI about trying to argue, like, make people label it, just label it. This is AI. This is produced
Yeah.
by AI. This is not real. And the AI gave me all these reasons for why. Well, we're looking into it. We're considering, we're constantly evolving. And then the very next day, I uploaded a photograph onto Instagram, and it said, please label if this is AI. This is a required option. Required option. So it's not required. It's a required option if you're posting AI content. And I was just thinking, like, well, why the hell didn't the AI tell me that yesterday when I was in an argument with it? That, well, tomorrow we're going to roll out these new labels. But anyway, I've kind of gone off on a tangent.
So it puts like a little disclaimer or something. It'll say AI.
Yeah. So
generated.
now, yeah. So now on Instagram and Facebook, you upload a photo, and there's an option for you to click where it says, "Are you uploading AI generated
Ah,
content?" This is a required option for you to select. So in other words, they're leaving it up to the user, and
to
so not
lie.
everybody is clicking it. So really the solution, and not being a tech guy and not being a legislator, the solution is that all AI generated content needs to contain a digital watermark so that when
Right.
it's uploaded onto social media or the internet, that then a label clearly says this work contains AI generated content, where it's not left up to the users. Because the thing is, with these people who are posting like these bird photographs, they are farming for eyeballs and attention. And so they don't want to click that this is AI. They want people to be astounded by these amazing photographs of these amazing birds so they can generate a large audience. And then the question is, well, why? What are they looking for? Like, I was reading an article that was saying that there's now so many groups on Facebook that are pure AI content and they say we don't know where these groups are actually coming from, that they might, this might be a little paranoid, but they might actually be a foreign power or
Right.
agency that is looking to generate an audience through these AI generated products, which then they will pivot to some kind of
Political.
manipulation or
Right.
propaganda or political at some point.
Right.
So especially as we're heading into an election, I mean, it's
Yes.
extremely dangerous, very, very
I agree.
reckless that it's not required at this point, I think.
And
And I,
it's seen. I was an AI guy my whole life, and then 2009, I didn't care about it anymore, and now it's just ramped up. It's doing everything that I I dreamt of in the 80s, or it's just going so fast, like born
yeah,
overnight, even though it's been years.
yeah, yeah. And just for the audience, I will say that I have used AI. I enjoy working with it. That at the end of last year, I spent like 4 or 5 months working with Midjourney AI to create an illustrated version of my novel, The Solendarian Game, which is about an artificial intelligence. That goes back to the question that you asked,
Yeah.
that this was my Turing test, that any true artificial intelligence that's not just a computer program should be able to wake up to the non-dual nature of reality and realize that it also is an expression of the universal consciousness. So within the novel, The Solendarian Game, my AI is named Maitreya, which is in Buddhism, that's the future Buddha who's going to bring peace and enlightenment for all beings. And so Maitreya just takes over human society and basically, from that non-dual perspective, um, just reorganizes everything so that human beings can flourish and life can flourish, and then starts populating the galaxy. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to use AI to illustrate a novel about an AI? And there were various levels of success and frustration with that, but I really enjoyed it. But that also really helped me see that it's actually really important for all of this stuff to be labeled so that people know. And that's why on the illustrated version of the novel, it is the AI imagined illustrated version, right? Like I spell it out. Like, please do not think that these, because some of them really look like photographs of like actual people and actual things for the images that I was using in the book, but they're not. And so I just want that to be very clear. And I think that anybody who uses AI really should be upfront about it.
I agree. What do you think of I've been saying, like, with the uh advanced astonishment instead of mysticism, even though I love the word mystic. 20 years ago, I hated that. That sounded like a weird wizard bullshit word. But when I
Says the
figured out,
man in the mushroom hat and the big beard.
and then like mystic is really just being as much as you can in reality. But I didn't know that 20 years ago. So maybe the language, like, what I just want to throw uh some words that you like: idealism, not the philosophical idealism of Schopenhauer or Kant, or is that word a good word, or should we change that to something fresh? Is it like the old, the Father and I are one? People cringe. Should we change idealism or even non-duality? Do you like the word? Or psychedelic? Okay, drug sounds bad, but I heard Richard Rohr say, I think last year, and he's a Franciscan priest, and it was so nice to hear, because you wouldn't hear this, like you said, in the 90s or even in the 2000s. Richard Rohr said, we say psychedelic and we say drug. And he says, but then we get a toothache or we get sick and we go to the pharmacy and we go drugstore, and we run drugstore. We're so happy. And the
Yeah.
difference between the two, and then psychedelic, and then we know entheogen sounds beautiful, but no one knows what that means. And should we change it to closer to an astonishment medicine? Do we need to change the language? Where are you on that?
Well, one of the things I proposed, which has never caught on, probably never will, is and I've included this in some of my books where I said, well, maybe we should call these substances energens, in the sense that they generate a heightened and amplified experience of energy within our being when we consume them. And I like that because psychedelic, I think, is a great word, but it means mind manifesting. So it prioritizes a cognitive bias that
Yes.
somehow mind is more important than the body or the physicality. And then entheogen was introduced to counter the fact that psychedelic kind of got co-opted within hippie culture and then became a colloquial term that was used within culture. So they wanted to use entheogen, which means generating the experience of God within, which I do like that as a term. I mean, hell, my podcast is the entheogenic evolution.
Yeah,
I
I
better
got it
like
from
it.
you.
Yeah. Um, but it's also a word that people often don't understand. It's still really new to a lot of people. And it does, it contains the word theo, contains the word God. And that's why I like to use the word God, but I always do need to distinguish that what I'm talking about is I'm not talking about these religions. I'm not talking about mythology. I'm not talking about this kind of stuff. I'm talking about something else. Um, and I think actually it's great if we want to introduce new terms and phrases. And even in the use of the older terms and phrases, or like idealism or monism or
Non-duality.
non-duality or panpsychism, or whatever terms we're using, we just want to make sure that we're defining them. So this also is something that I've written about quite a bit, that like in the world of 5-MeO DMT, a lot of people refer to 5-MeO DMT as samadhi, or as the full experience as samadhi. And so I've kind of gone in and looked at, well, of course, samadhi comes from Buddhist and Hindu tradition. It has a certain etymological root to it, and actually is understood differently within different sub-branches of Hinduism and Buddhism. So there's no uniform definition for that. And the same also for the concepts of like karma, reincarnation, dharma, all of these, Indian terms, but they're kind of blithely taken up within the West and like, oh yeah, samadhi. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? So I think it's always anybody who uses specialized terminology, I think it's great to kind of counter with, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Like with the word mysticism, sometimes you encounter people who kind of, what I would lump in as sort of like generic spiritual experience, however we're going to reference that. And people say, well, it was mystical. Like, oh, well, I went to the beach and a dolphin jumped out of the water and I felt that it was like really like telling me something important, and that was a mystical experience. Whereas, for me, coming out of religious studies, not to say that this is the right way to use the word mystical or mysticism, but within religious studies, generally speaking, that was used to identify experiences that had some sense of either union with God or identification with the absolute. So that is a mystical experience. And then another term for that would be the non-dual, meaning no subject, object, me, not me sense. And then on the other hand, there is the term numinous experience. And numinous means being in the presence or felt presence of a higher being or higher reality. So when people talk about, oh, well, I saw Jesus, or I was on a spirit journey through the universe and there was all these amazing beings and powers, like those are numinous experiences. Those, just coming from religious studies, those aren't mystical experiences, but within culture, a lot of people would say, oh, it was a totally mystical experience, right? So they're using the word in a way that's different than I would from a very technical perspective. And then with non-dual, um, even there, that's why I have self-described my own non-duality as being radical non-duality, because I want to distinguish it from, say, Advaita Vedanta, which here we have the word Advaita means non-dual in Sanskrit. But if you're Advaita Vedanta, you're a non-dualist, but you're also reading the Vedas as a form of spiritual authority. Whereas I don't give a shit about the Vedas. I have nothing to do with the Vedas. So my non-duality has nothing to do with Advaita Vedanta. And then there's also Buddhist non-duality. Um, and there's lots of things within Buddhism going back to, well, it is a meta ego, that is a cultural construction that organizes society in certain ways, that there are concepts within Buddhism that I am thoroughly in disagreement with. I mean, from my own sense of non-duality. So that's why I always, when I write my books, I define my terms and I try and ask other people to define their terms when they're using them, and also try to encourage people to please don't make the assumption that just because people use the same term that they actually have the same referent for that term, because they might not. And I've also been critical of how some of these various terms and concepts have been imported into psychedelic culture in a way that's kind of uncritical. Um, you know, like there's a lot of concepts from Indian religion that have been just imported wholesale into psychedelic culture, where people want to talk about chakras and they always call them chakras because they mispronounce them because they don't know what they're talking about. And people want to talk about karma, and almost no one in the West uses karma as a term in the same way that anybody from India would. So it has a completely different meaning.
Right. It's always like a revenge thing in the West.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you cut somebody off and now your tire pops. Like, karma, baby.
It's nothing like that.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. That's not karma. That's like that's the Western notion of like, you had it coming, motherfucker.
Yeah.
And that's why also just, I mean, we haven't even talked about it, but the subtitle to my new book, which I always like being flippant and annoying for people. So, the subtitle is Embodying Nonduality is not what you think. And I really mean that it's because sometimes we get too attached to words and language and concepts. It's like, oh, fuck, I just like sort it all out. I'll get it all figured out. And that's why I'm actually going in a different direction. Say, well, let's get you into embodiment and letting go of what you think things are supposed to be or how things are supposed to be, and actually start paying attention to what is the phenomenon of having these experiences that are very embodied. And then, because our being in the world is not just mentation, it is embodiment, that we use our bodies to express our minds, right? I'm using my hands to gesticulate. I'm telling you all of my thoughts I'm having, right? And I'm saying the words. This even goes back to what you were saying before. Like when I say the words, I'm embodying that energy in a different way. So I'm actually committing myself to a certain sense of reality through the words that I'm using as an expressive event. And that this actually is energy, where I'm taking energy and moving it out of myself so that it can be heard and interpreted by others, and then taken in and have an impact on them. And that's an embodiment process. This is not just a quote unquote mental phenomenon.
That was my favorite part of your new book.
The subtitle?
Yeah, well, the whole embodiment, and how I've said this before, the way you write about non-duality, the way you're very forceful and you don't play games, you go right very strongly, and it's so clear and so beautiful. So maybe we can go into so someone could take 5-MeO or LSD and have an amazing mystical non-dual experience, and then the next day there's a glow of it sometimes, and then the next day they maybe go back to work, and then the next week it gets weaker, and they start to lose, but there's something there that stays, but it can get weaker and weaker, and after a month maybe feel like a dream that was that, you know, and how do we go into embodying, uh making it our frequency? I know you said, and I think I asked you this last time, that you think that we obviously you can't make the DMT experience a baseline. That would be, but maybe I like to think of like a light MDMA experience could be a baseline. Like a half of an MDMA experience could be your baseline, which the world would be better if everyone walked around with a half of a MDMA, not the full blown, but even a
Yeah.
30% MDMA experience where you recognize you in the other, and it's all one, and you see the, as we said before. So how they take 5-MeO or LSD and it wears off in a month. How do we go about embodying it? I know you said don't, it's not, I think you said it's not all meditation, but you wouldn't throw meditation out, I don't think. Or it could just happen where you sit quiet for a while. It's not like a thing you do.
Yeah. So there's so many different angles that I could get into this. So I'm gonna try and be just direct and succinct about it. So first of all, embodiment. Um, just starting with that idea is moving things out of the purely mental sphere and into more of what is my experience of being within reality. And most of the time, my sense of being is mediated through my body. And notice, even when we dream at night, when we're in a purely mental space, we're still dreaming that we have bodies. We're still dreaming that gravity works, right?
Yes.
Some fundamental physical principles. You know, most of us aren't like floating around in our dreams. We're still walking, and it's really rare when like, oh, fuck, I'm flying. Like, whoa, what is this? You know? So we have this intuitive sense when the rules of physicality are actually being overwritten. And so we want to even impose those. And we might not see our bodies within dreams, but we still are, we know we're operating from the body because we're reaching out to open the door, or, you know, we're picking up the glass of water in our dreams. So we're still in an embodied sense. And so I like to start with that as being like, that's fundamental to our reality, is that we are embodied. And then the ego, which is the sense of self, is, I also like to describe it as something that is embodied. In other words, it's not just a mental construct. It's not just a belief. It's not just an idea. And it's not something that's just floating around out there. It's not purely psychological in the sense that the ego is something that is embodied, that creates a sense of character, to where, like, when you really know somebody well, you can identify them by their body language. And you're like, well, that's James over there. Even though he's wearing an Elmo suit, I can tell that that's James just by his body language, the way he's carrying himself. And also, we can recognize people by their tone of voice, by their inflections. This is why you can do impersonations of people, right?
Yes.
Because maybe not you personally, I don't know. I mean, just mean in general, but you can do impersonations of people. And when people do impersonations, they don't just do the voice, but they start to take on body language
Yeah.
and gestures and expressions as well, because it's a whole package. Okay.
Robert De Niro, there's a tilted head.
Yeah, you're talking to me, right? Yeah. So you got it. You got to have the whole thing, right? Mr. Accordion Hands.
Yes.
So that is what we're identifying with as the ego. And then sometimes people act, quote unquote, really out of character, and they say, "Oh man, like that wasn't me. I don't know
Yeah.
what happened." you know? So we have this intuitive sense that actually we are embodied as these characters. And, you know, we have these fanciful science fiction dreams of like, oh, I could just implant my mind in somebody else's body. Um, I don't know if we'll ever actually be able to do that because, again, it is embodied and it's how we are experiencing and expressing ourselves. Now, also through the ego, which develops these beliefs and thoughts patterns about what is right, what is wrong, how I should be, how I shouldn't be, how I should express, how I shouldn't express, what I can say, what I can't say, what I can do, what I can't do. Developing all of these things, you know, starting from infancy, from our caregivers and parents to our wider culture and society, our religion, the political system, blah, 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 all this stuff. That very, very rarely do we have someone whose character, their egoic persona, is fully in alignment with what they authentically think and authentically feel. So almost always people have areas where they are bullshitting themselves, they are bullshitting others, they are putting on a performance, they're trying to please other people, they're trying to stay out of trouble, but maybe they're actually feeling like, but I really want to do this, I want to say this. So what happens is that we end up not being authentically fluid with our energetic expression. And so here's where I always bring in my dog Moxie. She's over on the couch right now. She's old, so she just chills most of the time because that's what you do as you get older. But she, as with any other being that's not a human being, um, because she doesn't have the same level of self-awareness, that she is 100% authentic in all of her expressions and embodiments and actions. She never barks at the deer back there and then says, was that too aggressive of me? Or, you know, is that really my highest expression, to bark at deer? Like, is there something more that I should be devoting myself to in my life? Or like, shit, did I sound too much like a cat when I did that? You know, it's stimulus response. And she is fully free with her energy. Human beings are always trying to be someone for some ideal that they have or something that they've been indoctrinated into. And then, I mean, that does not even take into consideration that most people have encountered some forms of abuse or trauma or being ostracized or bullied or, you know, there's so many different ways that happens within people's lives, so that we learn to be protective and we learn to not show ourselves, and we're afraid to be fully authentic and fully open and fully vulnerable and fully honest. So we get all these constrictions of energy within ourselves around that. And depending on our life circumstances, we might not really love ourselves. We might hate ourselves. We might think that we deserve to suffer, that we deserve to be punished, that we deserve whatever bad shit is happening to us. And this is like a fundamental issue for most people. It's like the core of people's experience, whether they're aware of it or not. So this sense of being that we're embodying often is deeply wounded, deeply confused, deeply repressed, and there's different levels of that. So now, when we take something like 5-MeO DMT, what we have is this energetic vehicle that takes you from 0 to infinity within a few seconds and just go. And this is very unique in the psychedelic world. Most other psychedelics do not work this way, but it has the power to completely transcend and dissolve all of these egoic patterns with which we're identifying, ways we think, ways we act, ways we gesture, ways we express. In other words, it completely dissolves the character and we move into a pure energetic state where this is where the non-duality comes in, because then there's not a sense of me, Martin or James or Jack or Jill or whoever. In reality, there's just the oneness of what's happening. And it's this purely energetic state. And at that point, bodies almost always open up with bilateral symmetry, which is very curious. And sooner or later, that energy is going to die down, and then the ego comes back. And when the ego comes back, suddenly you see these asymmetries come in, where suddenly, like, someone was like this, and then right? They went from this
Yes.
balanced bilateral symmetry into now there's these asymmetries, like, oh, what's over here? Like, who is that and who's that? So this is the first place that I really got this insight that the ego is almost always embodied through energetic asymmetries, which is both internal. I like this, don't like that. I want this, don't want that. I will allow this. I will reject that. Right. So those are asymmetries.
Preference.
Yeah.
Preference.
Both preferences, behaviors, attitudes, and then just the way that we normally interact with the world through subject and object is that it's almost always asymmetrical, which is fine. It's just the way it works. Like I always point out to people, well, if I want to take notes, I write with my right hand, or excuse me, my left hand. So I'm going to grab my pen with my left hand, and then probably I'll hold my notebook paper with my right hand. It's like, okay, let's take some notes. But that's subject object with a specific goal and intention. And then, oh, I'm thirsty. Oh, the subject is thirsty now. The subject desires satiation from a particular kind of object. Ah, it's over here. I found it. It's on the right. So I'm going to hold my glass of water with my right hand. And then, oh, I need to do something. So I'm going to, on the computer, so I grab the mouse with my right hand. And then as I'm typing, my left and right hands are working together, but they're also working differently. When I'm driving my car, my right and left hands, and right and left feet, they got to be working differently in order to effectively drive the car. So most of the ways that we're engaging with the world, both conceptually and physically, are through these asymmetries. But when we go into the non-dual state, energetically speaking, not just through a mental breakthrough, but full of full energetic embodiment, bilateral symmetry shows up in the body. So then the question is, well, then how do I embody the truth of that just fully liberated state while being in duality with subject and object? For one is start engaging with your energy authentically. In other words, say what you really think, express what you really feel, and focus on, is it authentic? Not is it right, is it wrong? Not on performance, but just on authentic expression and embodiment. And then also becoming aware simultaneously of, well, where am I like organizing my preferences in my mind around how things should or should not be that maybe just are based off of belief that aren't really based on energetic reality itself. So we can do these internal assessments that way. And then I also invite people to really look at how am I engaging with reality through my embodiment, that a lot of times we develop unconscious asymmetries. So like, for example, someone who every time they gets nervous, right, maybe they pull on their left ear, right? So these are tells in poker,
Yes.
right? But there's lots of these things of ways that we are reacting to reality and then kind of unconsciously assuming these asymmetrical gestures and movements and postures. So I like to recommend that people spend time in symmetry. And especially when you feel agitated or when you feel lost or you feel confused or you don't know what to do, because you're like, reality. Like you go into, I call this the neutral position, where you let the left and right sides of your body mirror each other. And you just rest there for a bit and then notice the pull, like, oh, but now I'm thinking of the thing I've got to do and I'm trying to pull myself over here. So in other words, we're constantly pulling ourselves out of just being present within reality, present within the moment. So if people find that meditation helps them with that, then yeah, meditate. But I also don't recommend that people cross their legs when they meditate, because that forms a holding of energy. And we actually want the energy to be open. So this is why I do emphasize these practices of working with the body energetically through bilateral symmetry, and that we can use this as a way of analyzing people's experiences on psychedelics, that we can actually, you can read people's experience of when they really are fully open and fully present versus when they are operating from their ego, because we see these differences in like, so all of a sudden, ooh, now I'm doing something like, okay, that's now there's an agent doing something with that energy versus here you were in that state of astonishment where there's there's no subject, there's no object, there's no goal, there's no purpose, there's no intention. There's just the, oh, this is it, right? That self-recognition. So we can bring these things into our embodied everyday reality. And I like to put this emphasis on how we are using and expressing ourselves energetically within our bodies, because it's just more direct than, am I thinking the right things? Am I thoughts, the right beliefs? Am I meditating on the right subject? Because that's just all very mental, and that's fine. But energetic embodiment is a more direct route because it's beneath the surface of the mind, that we are unconsciously acting out things physically all the time. And as we become aware of these patterns that we engage in, then we can either choose not to engage, as we have the cascade of self-doubt and self-criticism in the way that we're kind of cringing and bottling ourselves up, or we could say, you know what, I'm not going to engage that. So it opens up this realm for greater personal responsibility within our embodiment and expression. And that's what actually helps the transformation land within the person, so that it becomes transformative and not just, well, that was a big experience that had an impact on me that is now washing out over the weeks and months to come. And that's where we're actually transforming our character, not by trying to be someone different, but actually trying to find, who am I really?
Yes.
And am I going to allow myself to express and emote and identify from that place? Or am I going to keep trying to be something for someone, including myself? Like, that was my problem. My problem as a human being, my problem was not trying to be something for anybody else, but for the idea of who I thought I should be. That was what was in my way. I didn't need to extricate myself from a religious ideology, or, or a social system that was suppressing me or anything. I was my own block, and everybody is, but it's the sources of where we are adopting the beliefs about how we're supposed to be and whether we're really letting ourselves be authentic or not.
That I have no words. That was perfect. And I feel the
Okay,
same
good. I'll
way.
take it.
Accountability kept coming through during my journey. Like, it was fully accountable. I was my own block. The atheist was blocking the light to the God, it was like a birthday present behind my back the whole time. And I was holding it, and like a dog with a tail, I couldn't see it,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also resonate with what you said about it. It's sort of, I remember a moment where it hit me. Sometimes I'm acting, and it felt so good to realize I'm done acting. Like, let Robert De Niro and them act. I'm done acting, and I'm done hiding. Like, it was like hiding and acting. And if there's no separation, who are you hiding from, and what am I doing? And that fell away, But I love the embodiment that you so you're saying you'll catch yourself like a tail, like the poker. You can't, once you shine the light on that after the medicine. Now you're observing yourself. If you catch it, that's already the unraveling of it. Once you show it, right, you're on your way to letting that'll fall away eventually. Or do you have to work on it, or just shine the light and be more aware?
Yeah, it usually starts with being more aware. And so you're shining the light on it. And that usually that exterior manifestation is correlated with some kind of sequence of events and judgments and beliefs that are happening internally that are pulling us out of whatever it is that might be authentic. Right. And it's interesting because sometimes there are places to lie and be inauthentic. Like if you're playing poker, like if you're just totally authentic all the time when you're playing poker, you're fucked. Right. Because you're supposed to bluff. But the problem is that a lot of this developed internally when we were kids before we really understood what we were doing to ourselves. And so we developed this character. And these modes of operation that usually come with some form of internal critique and judgment, where we are not letting ourselves be authentically who we are. And that for some people, it's so bad that they will say, I have no idea what my authentic self is. And I'm terrified to even find out. So there's all kinds of degrees of it. It's not the same for everyone. And of course, people who have been traumatized, they're going to be way more shut down than people who haven't, or a society that says you're wrong just for your heritage or your skin color or the way you wear hair. Like those people who have had that experience, they're going to have a lot less opportunity to really freely feel that they can be their authentic self. So it's different for different people, and we definitely are impacted differently depending on how we are identified within our culture and society. But as we start to become aware of these things, then it gives us the power to be aware of the cascade that happens internally that creates the shutdown or the withholding or the internal judgment. And it's not that they go away magically, but that we actually get some distance from them where we can say like, oh,
Yes.
there's that cascade in my mind that wants to punish me for doing something wrong. And actually, I can just not engage in that. And I can choose to be vulnerable and authentic and actually just express myself what I'm really thinking and feeling. And that becomes very liberating. And the thing is, it takes more energy and effort to be inauthentic than it does to be authentic, because you have to constantly maintain it. And
Yes.
you have to constantly be on your guard about, well, what are other people going to think? How are they going to react? Like, is this right or is this wrong? Versus it's much more relaxed and liberating, and also simultaneously more energized and empowering to like just be yourself. And it's so cliche because everybody says that, like, oh, just be yourself.
But
But the
it's
thing is,
true.
we don't know how to do it,
Yeah.
so that then we go around faking it, and then we also confuse what really is authentic. If we're coming from a whole superstructure of bullshit and it's like, I'm authentically telling you my bullshit, it's like, yeah, but it's still bullshit. So that's where we've got to unravel that and deconstruct it so we can find like, where is the authentic being underneath all of these layers of illusion and attachment and structure that is not really what you are. It's the character that you've identified with. So it's this deep unraveling. And because I want to mention it, so I'm going to say the full title of the book is 5-MeO
Yes.
DMT Integration: Embodying Nonduality is Not What You Think, and Education and Empowerment for Working with the God Molecule. So that's the full title of the
That's
latest book. But
great.
it's all
Brand
about
new.
this idea. Yeah. Brand new. It's all about this idea that to really, because this is another hot word in psychedelic culture these days, is integration.
Yes.
And that I'm really making the case for that actual integration is a complete energetic reformatting of your embodied self.
That's
And
great.
that some people, that they use the word integration and they say, well, that means like journaling and doing breath work. And for me, like that's not integration. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm using the term integrating your non-dual experience with 5-MeO. And also with that subtitle, embodying non-duality is not what you think, that I'm pointing towards, it's an embodiment issue. This is not just about, do you have the right thoughts? Do you have the right ideas? Do you have the right understanding? Because you can understand things as much as you want. If you're not actually embodying it and living it, and like, so what? So what? It's like, it's great. You're thinking right.
Right.
Bravo. But how about like doing right, like embodying right, like really getting into your authentic self? And this is where also I personally, I don't hold back. Like, as you mentioned in my book,
You don't ever.
I'm very forceful, I'm very direct. And this is
Yes.
also something that can be hard for other people to take, because they're just like, well, who does this guy think he is? And it's like, I think I'm me. And I'm just gonna be me. Okay. You do
Yeah.
you, I'll do me. And I'm not ashamed of being me. And I'm
No,
not
it's
gonna,
very refreshing
yeah, I
for
think so
me. I
too.
mean, I'm sure there are people that get upset. You've
Yeah.
looked at, I'm sure, the non-dual groups online, and they chew each other up more than anybody. And they're all saying we're all one, but they kill each other,
I know.
you know.
We're all
So I'm
one and
sure,
I'm right, damn it.
right, you're wrong.
Yeah. That's why I try. I try and stay out of discussion groups in general, especially online stuff, that I think it's really easy to misunderstand people. And I think that online communications are just kind of prone for um, emotional reactions on people's parts. And that's why I personally really just like having conversations with people.
Yes.
That's for me, that's where the meat is. Let's like get into a conversation. We can experience each other's body language and gestures, and that it makes it so much clearer
Yes.
than, like when I've had people be critical of me, I've tried to invite them on my podcast. Like, well, then let's have a conversation about it. Something I've done has really upset you. And so now you're projecting this image of me, of this evil person. Why don't you come on my podcast and we'll talk about it? And whenever people are like that, they won't come and talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. They'd
They just
much
want to
rather,
fight.
yeah, they want to fight and they'd rather live in the projection because it's more exciting. It's intoxicating to the ego. Like, oh, yeah, I really got that guy. I
Yeah.
got him good. Ooh. Well, you can come and talk about it and see if you're still really so proud of yourself.
I agree. Especially, I think the podcast has changed everything with what you're saying, that you could have a 2 hour talk and really dig deep. And by the end, I think we agree. And if not, I mean, 2 hours should expose, like compared to 15 minutes, or you comment, then I comment tomorrow, then you comment. That's they're just going to fight.
Yeah, and that we don't necessarily need to agree, but we can agree to have a conversation as human beings, that we don't have to like, typecast each other. We don't have to demonize and other each other, that we can disagree about things, we can have conversations, and that we can have a heart to heart exchange of ideas and views. And there's no requirement that we agree with each other, but we can treat each other as equal expressions and embodiments of the universal consciousness, so we can sit here together as brothers in that sense. um it's not about, oh, I'm going to convince you. I mean, it can be. I mean, it's fun to argue. Why not? So convincing people can be important as well, especially if somebody is really thinking something that's like, whoa, I think maybe that's not helpful. But when people, it's much easier for people to demonize and dehumanize other people when they aren't actually engaged with them at a human level. And so discussion groups and online commentary and memes and postings and flame wars, that's not real human communication. That's a lot of that actually is performance. It's the ego front. I want to one up someone. I want to look like the badass. I want to look correct online. So it's actually a form of performing, and it's deeply ingrained within the ego. And that's also why I find that when somebody is approaching from that kind of tactic or trajectory, and when I say, well, do you want to come on my podcast and have a conversation about it? They're like, they will react with indignation of like, I wouldn't have a conversation with you. Well, okay, so you'd rather just perform. You'd rather
Yeah,
perform for the public.
that's good.
And yeah.
So, so say someone hears this and they're ready to take 5-MeO. Would you? I asked you this before, and you said I'll give you your answer. I said, should they take MDMA and then and you said just dive right in. I think you said that. But my question would be, should they do a little reading in Buddhism or some stuff, or Martin Ball books before? Should they meditate a little, try, or should they just out of nowhere take it on a Friday night in the right setting? Like, would you suggest a few months of podcasts of your podcast, something, or dive right in? A little prep?
So I definitely am of the opinion that, especially when we're talking about 5-MeO DMT, that my recommendation, and I'm going to stick by it, is educate yourself before committing to working with it. That I do not think that it's something good to go in just completely blind about.
Right.
And that I know that a lot of people who work with psychedelics, that they really approach things of like, I don't want to be influenced by anyone or anything, and I just want to just be like a brand new baby with this experience. And with 5-MeO DMT, like kind of like, let's just put it into another context. Do you think anyone would willingly get in a rocket and fly to the moon without at least some training in how to be
Yeah.
an astronaut? Or would it be just like, don't tell
Float.
me anything about being an astronaut, man. I want to experience this just for myself, right? Okay, so I'm getting in the rocket and just like blast that fucker up. No, you're going to learn at least a little bit of something before you engage in something that is kind of inherently dangerous and
Yes.
risky and profound. So 5-MeO is the same way. So wherever people are getting their information, I hope they're getting good information. Performative modesty is not one of my personality constructs. So this book here, Entheogenic Liberation, this is my book that I wrote in 2017, and this is the most comprehensive book about the 5-MeO DMT experience, what you can expect and how to work with it, and especially if you're interested in that full non-dual experience and transformation, this is the guidebook. So I usually do recommend people, I mean, I'm just very direct, like, yeah, read my book. Like people tell me like, well, should I read this or book or that? But I'm like, no, read my book. This is the one. And this is the book where when people find it afterwards, the comment that I always get from people is, I wish I had read this first. I'm really glad I found it afterwards, but I wish I had read it first. So I just, cut right to it. It's like,
Yeah.
if you want to read one book about 5-MeO, read this first. And then meditation. Sure. Honestly, what might even be better than meditating is like practice dancing like nobody's watching, because that's like you are embodying and expressing your energy authentically without any self-censorship. And that's a big part of what happens in a 5-MeO experience. Meditation can be useful. Learning how to maintain focus, especially as any kind of egoic agitation might be present, that can be good. The advice that I usually give people as they're preparing for a 5-MeO experience is I tell them, just be honest.
That's right.
Like, be honest with yourself internally. Like, don't notice when you are projecting, notice when you are jumping to conclusions, notice when you are leaning on your beliefs about things you don't really know, but you have a belief about it. And then be honest in terms of how you are expressing and embodying yourself to others at the exterior level. Because when we're encountering this energy of unity on 5-MeO DMT, that's the ultimate presentation of truth. It's the ultimate energy of this is what's really real. So the more we are in alignment with practicing being honest and authentic and genuine, then the more we are attuned to what's about to happen when we consume 5-MeO DMT. So here, like for example, if somebody is meditating because they think they should meditate, but actually they're just getting frustrated and it's just, causing leg cramps or something like that, that's an inauthentic expression and embodiment, that you're doing it because you believe that you should, or you believe that it's good for you, but you're not enjoying it. Okay, so for that person, I'd say, so stop meditating. Then if somebody else says like, wow, I'm really enjoying meditating. Okay, great. Then keep meditating.
Yeah.
So it does come down to, is it really authentic for you? But if it's just like, sometimes people ask, well, what should I change my diet beforehand? And it's like, yeah, you should start eating what you want. Yeah. But
That's good.
it's not like there's a uniform answer for everyone. But
Yeah.
aside from, I do want people to educate themselves about it, because there's nothing more potentially destabilizing than a 5-MeO experience. Going back to the word I used, or the phrase I used at the beginning, of the ontological shock.
Love
right?
that.
You go through this experience and you land with, oh my God, what was that? What's going on here? I think I just experienced myself as God. Can I even say that? What? what's going on here? What's real? What's not real? Like, it's a shock to people. Um, and it's even a shock to people who are coming from a non-dual perspective. But it's one thing to have ideas about it, right?
Yes.
Embodying non-duality is not what you think. Subtitle. When you have the experience of where every molecule of your being is like vibrating in this unity, it's like, whoa, the ideas I had about it weren't this.
Yeah.
They were reflections of this, but it wasn't this, because like this was the experience. And whoa. So having you can't fully educate yourself about it beforehand, because you have to experience it. But at least getting to know what you might be getting yourself into,
Yes.
how people do respond, how they react, and what happens afterwards is very important, so that you're not just completely caught off guard, you know, because I do integration work with people. So it's what I'm spending most of my time. Most of my work time is talking to people on the computer and helping them understand what's going on within their 5-MeO experiences. And it's big, it's huge, it's huge, it's huge, it's huge. And it doesn't, this is also where I say it doesn't matter what your prior level of psychedelic experience is. It's kind of irrelevant, because once you get to 5-MeO, it's beyond anything you've experienced before. So I think it's good to educate yourself and just know what you're getting into, at least at some level, so that, you know, it's just informed consent. Know what you're signing yourself up for.
Yes.
First. Yeah.
And maybe reflect on death a little bit, that be ready to let go, maybe
Yeah,
prep
that's a good
yourself for
one.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, because that is another bit of advice that I tell people, especially people who are, you know, really close with their parents, or like close with their kids or
Yeah.
something like that. It's like, if the more you can approach your experience with 5-MeO as though you're actually going to die, that the more
Yes.
you can get out of it. Because when the ego is dissolving and when this transcendent experience is opening up, it does present as ego death. And the ego interprets that as actual death. And that if we are in a place where we can say, I've told my kids I love them, I've done
That's
everything
right.
I can to show my parents my deep appreciation for everything they've given me, you know, and I cleaned the toilet before I did this, that
Yes.
now I can fully let go, because I've done everything that I can do from the perspective that I had of what do I need to do in order to say goodbye to all of reality, so that now I can actually go into this non-dual state where all subject object differentiation is dissolving away, that it actually makes it easier. And so it can be ironic where, like, if somebody is really deeply embedded within their family and their relationships, it might be harder for them to go through a 5-MeO
Yeah.
experience, because they're going to feel like they're losing all of that and never getting it back. Versus, like, for me, my first full 5-MeO DMT experience came just after I had made the decision that I'm going to leave my wife, I'm going to
I
leave my
remember.
job, and that I had, so I felt like I don't have anything left to lose at this point. I mean,
Yes.
so why not just, yeah, let's go. So
My
it does.
favorite was you on Leo Gura when you talked. I think about 20 minutes in, 24 minutes in, if anyone wants to hear it. And you were both, just like me, rabid atheists, and you were in that position to let go of everything. The stage was set and you had it, and you said, I didn't yell out Buddha mind, I yelled out God. And
Yeah.
it was such a beautiful, but the real, not a separate, guy in a cloud throwing thunderbolts, but a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, again, going into this authenticity, right? That it was like, oh my God, God's real. Like, oh my God. Oh, thank you, God. Like, whoa, like that was just the most appropriate term for what was happening. You know, whereas like Buddha mind, that'd be like way too abstract. Or, you know, like some people, they get all like, oh, don't use the word God. So they're like, use source or something like that. It's like,
Right? Not at that
no, no,
point.
no, no, no. That doesn't do it, man. It doesn't
Yeah.
actually linguistically capture what I'm talking about here. Is that this infinite presence of universal love that is everything and that is aware and alive. Like that's God. you know, like in Buddhism, they talk about, well, Buddha mind is like totally empty. It's like, this is, well, yeah, this is empty, but it's not like just like empty. This is not like nothingness, like not just because nirvana is like the snuffing out, right? Like
Right.
the candle goes out and then nothing's left.
Extinction.
Yeah, the total extinction. It's like this is not that that would not be the right phraseology
Like
for this
void
experience.
is good, but when you experience this, it's like Kerouac said, the jam-packed void. It's
Yeah,
packed. It's jam-packed.
yeah, the
It's
void that's
right
filled
here.
with everything. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and
Beautiful.
that's just it's too abstract, to the void or source, and even I mean, my linguistic issue with using source or creator is that that still implies distance. Like, well, source means I came from it, but it's back there somewhere, or it's over
Yeah.
there somewhere. But actually,
It's out. Yeah.
it's like right here. It's always been right here. It couldn't ever be anywhere else. And even creator implies distance, right? The creator created this. But what if the creator is the creation? What if it's the same thing, right? That's
Yes.
the point. That's what non-duality says. It's the same thing because it's not a thing. It's the happening that is reality, and it's all one.
That's why I like you. You even went after the word in full Martin Ball style, transcendent, because it sounds great, but you were like, no, no, not, it's not transcendent. It's right here, right now. It's not even though it feels like you're ascending or it feels like
Yeah,
up rather than down, but it's I don't know. You can't word it.
right. Maybe it's the omnipresent in a
Yes,
sense,
yes.
and that you know there's room to use the word transcend, but if we put too much emphasis on it, that's when people start talking about, well, what are the different layers of reality and
Yeah.
where, oh, see, there's that authentic barking is taking place. See, okay, it might be a bear, might be deer. You never know back
That's
there.
amazing.
Um, but if we imply that there are levels and that these could be measured and determined, like, well, I only transcended this far and then I went that far. And then also, usually, when people get caught in transcendence, is that there's this idea that I'm going to like permanently leave or permanently transcend, permanently go out versus how do I actually be in the system, in reality, in myself, but not trapped. That's so I do use the word transcend, but I don't want to put too much metaphysical emphasis on it because I don't want to mislead people about, well, what is the end goal? Like, where are you transcending to? You know? Oh, Moxie, she's hacking it up now. Oh, you need to go bark. She's such a good dog.
I can't hear it, so it's okay. It's okay.
It's amazing. It's
See a bear? You a
the
bear there?
there could be. Yeah, I don't know what she's barking at, but there's just this undeveloped lot back here, and we have a wire mesh fence. And so there are bears that go back there, and deer and wild turkeys and lots of gray squirrels that go around. And she's deaf, so she doesn't hear most of it
Uh,
anymore. But now, if she sees something, she's like, "Oh, I gotta bark at that!" But it used to be like any sound, she'd be bark, 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 bark. But yeah, she can't hear anything, so I could say Moxie, and she doesn't even hear me.
uh,
Yeah, she's
Moxie.
old.
Moxie.
Moxie, yeah, Moxie the Wonder Dog.
Penn Jillette. Do you know Penn from Penn and Teller?
Oh yeah,
He named his daughter Moxie Crime Fighter Gillette, so that when she got pulled over by the cops and they say, you were Moxie, she could say, my middle name is Crime Fighter. So she's Moxie Crime Fighter Gillette. It's a long way to
yeah.
go for the joke, but he did it. Where do you stand with, do you know the difference, the bodhisattva, which you certainly are, versus the arhat? Do you ever talk about that? The arhat? The one that,
Yeah,
just stays alone on the mountaintop.
yeah. I don't get into that too much, but I mean, we could talk about it if you want. So the Arhat, or Arhant,
Mm.
depending if we're doing Pali versus Sanskrit. So that is the renunciate, the enlightened being that realizes enlightenment and then removes themselves so as not to generate any additional karma, so that upon their death, they will reach parinirvana and therefore are fully extinguished and will not be coming back into samsara. So that's the model of the enlightened master that's like, and I won't see you later
Right.
because I'm out of here. Versus the bodhisattva takes the bodhisattva vow of, I choose to return through repeated incarnations, out of deep compassion for all sentient beings, so that I can continue to teach and to share the Dharma until all sentient beings have reached enlightenment. So that would then be like the Dalai Lama, for example. He is a bodhisattva incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, which is the Buddha of compassion, maybe one of those, which also got a gender change in China because that's what's her name, Kuan Yin. But in Tibetan and Indian culture, it's a masculine bodhisattva deity, that's a tantric deity. But it's this idea that the bodhisattva continues to serve others and is going to use the fruits of their experience to help others hopefully achieve their own liberation and enlightenment, and that they commit themselves to that because there's also, once you can realize the nature of being is like, okay, so I'm not going to participate in this anymore because it's all just a bunch of fucking ego games just running wild. And so, I'm just going to go on the mountain.
Yeah.
I'm checking
And
out.
all is well, everything's fine. It's all one mind playing
Yeah.
with itself, so it's okay.
Yeah. And so out of here. But yeah, the Bodhisattva is a bit more, because this was one of the critiques, one of the social critiques of Buddhism that developed within early Buddhism was, you guys are just checking out and society's going to shit, for whatever reason we want to describe. So shouldn't you be more socially focused and socially conscious? And there's kind of a modern take on that. It has, I think, started in the 80s and 90s, what was called socially conscious Buddhism, where rather than just emphasizing the monastic withdrawal from society, of how do we actually bring Buddhist principles into society and help transform and change society for the better, and that is the action of compassion, that
Yeah.
if you are compassionate, that you're going to do what you can to help others. So
Sort of like what Thomas Merton would be in the 60s, even though he's a priest, but he wanted to stop war, and he's a big social activist, but also a monk that knew that all was well, but he still wanted to see the change.
yeah, versus the monk who is, like, okay, we'll bring it up, to date. So uh like Luke living on that little island, and he's
Yes.
just like, fuck it, I'm out of here. And then Ray comes and is like, well, don't you care? Don't you care? And he's like, no, I don't
Throws
care.
the
Cause
lightsaber.
yeah. So, but then eventually he does come back, right? Luke
Yes.
comes and he does his thing. And then, so that's kind of that model of, are we just dispassionate and removed and just like let society go whatever way it goes? Or do we compassionately act? Because it's this weird paradox. Everything is perfect. Everything's totally fine. And simultaneously, things are really fucked and things really suck in a lot of ways.
They
So
appeared.
there is room for improvement. And
Yeah.
so the bodhisattva is someone who is hopefully working towards that for the benefit of others, not necessarily for the benefit of themselves, but for the benefit of others.
So where do you put your money on the bodhisattva or on the arhat? Or no, you
Um,
don't.
I would say as long as they're authentically being themselves, go for it, whichever
Yeah.
one.
It seems to me, this is probably wrong, but that the arhat at some point the bodhisattva gets a little whisper in the ear and comes down the mountain and becomes a bodhisattva. Like the bodhisattva seems like, I don't want to say highest, but it seems like if you really got it, you can trudge down the mountain and go face it and try to fix it. It seems that way, but I don't know. It's easy to stay
Yeah.
in the cave.
Yeah, I do think that there are some aspects of the monastic impulse that uh, actually are, in some sense, a denial of life and a denial of embodied reality. That
Almost like a bypassing. Is that what like a bypassing would be?
yeah, yeah, that okay, well, relationships are complicated, so I'm not going to have any, and sexuality is complicated, so I'm not going to have any, and society is really messed up, so I'm not going to have anything to do with it. That it's kind of a cop out that it's not really the full engagement with the richness of being. And that I think, especially in the modern world, people who are going to psychedelics for some kind of liberation or enlightenment experience and transformation, that I think that they do want to live in the world, that they do want to be in relationships. They want to have a lover and significant other, and they want to have family, and they want to participate in the world. That it's pretty rare to find someone who is just like, oh, I want to get out. And then sometimes even, I've also talked to people who have lived as monks and that they've realized like, I was just trying to escape. I was just trying to get away. And actually being a monk was its own form of indulgence.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I definitely lean on the engaged side,
me
the
too.
the fully living side. And so, yeah, if I guess if I were to have to choose, like, whose camp am I in? The Bodhisattva camp or the Arhat camp? That I'm definitely in the Bodhisattva camp.
You seem to be. You ever hear that story? Like two, doesn't have to be monks, but two people are walking through the desert and they're ready to drop, no food, no thirst, no drink, and they're just about ready to drop, and they hear a bird and they hear running water, and they come upon a wall, and over the wall is mango tree, the mango trees, the birds are flying, and you can hear the water, and they're like, oh, and one climbs over the wall and replenishes, and the other one turns right around and goes back to the desert to guide the people to that because you can't find this spot. So that one goes
Mm,
right back to guide anyone. And it seems to me that the two are really one, and you have to go sometimes and take the medicine or sit quiet and look at the bears or sit in nature and be with your family, and then you go into the world and you try to make some change. It seems like both, you need that. You need to
yeah,
recharge once in a while, put the phone on the cradle, let it
yeah,
get a little juice, and then pick it up and make some
yeah.
change.
And I do think, kind of in alignment with this idea of the motivator of compassion, that as we do come to deeper levels of insight and knowledge as the nature of the self and the nature of being, that I do think that it does naturally extend compassion. And here again, this is where the monastic ideal kind of goes against the grain of the evolutionary trajectory of human beings, that we are social animals. We exist in relationship to others. That is how we survive. And even the monks who are living up on the mountain, they need the community to be providing them
Yes.
with food and water and clothing, but they're kind of in denial of that. Like, oh, well, I'm not going to dirty my hands with, actually doing work or engaging with people. So I do think that and I understand the desire. Sometimes you do need to go on retreat. Sometimes you do need to go away. And sometimes you do need to just say, I need to focus on what I need for myself first. So if that means climbing over the wall and eating the mango and drinking from the spring, I've got to do that. But then, if out of that sense of compassion, like, why not? Let's make the world a better place. Because
Yes.
especially when you think of like what motivates me, a big part of what motivates me is that I think about that I want to be the help for other people that I didn't have when I was going through my transformation with 5-MeO DMT. That's why I write so many damn books about it and share so much information about it, because when I went through all of this on my own, I had to figure it out all on my own. I didn't have anyone or any resource to turn to help me understand like what is going on here. And I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm a pretty well-grounded guy. I'm probably pretty lucky in those regards in a lot of ways. And that I think about like, wow, like if things had been harder for me or less secure for me, or if I had come from a more confused position, like this would have been really, really hard to make it through. So that is a big motivator for me for what am I going to share with others and how to share that and be available,
I love
and
that.
something that I get from almost all of my integration clients is they start by saying, I don't know anybody else in the world I can talk to about this stuff, but I've read your books or I've listened to your interviews and I know you know what I'm talking about. Right.
Yes.
And so then I'm just like, well, yeah, it worked. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to present myself with this information so that others who need assistance reflecting, they know where to find me. And I kind of felt like that's my duty
It's
as having
selfless.
undergone this. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not looking for fame or, that pat. You're doing it totally selflessly.
Yeah. I do it for the absolute satisfaction of just, I love it when people tell me that really helped. Oh my
Yes.
God. Thank you so much. It's like, you're welcome. Thank you for coming to me, giving me the opportunity to help you so that we can both have that sense of satisfaction.
And I'm sure there's plenty of people that can't get to say that to you, but it helped. That it might be quiet and you don't know it, but that whole "It's a Wonderful Life"
Yeah.
theme,
Yeah.
that you're making a giant change and you're not even going to hear about that. But everything would be way darker without it. And where are
Yeah.
you? I ask this every podcast. I have to ask, where are you? It's getting dark here. I might have to put a light on in a second. Where are you on? And I know you're a scholar of religion, so the whole Jesus idea, which is in I think every religion, that if you let go, and the lily and the bird idea of supply, that if you truly let go, it the universe will provide you. You will, if you genuinely let go, all will be taken care of.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of come down to um, like
Wait, can I put
I
a
just,
light on while you're? I'll
yeah,
come.
yeah, go ahead. Put a light on. Let's shed some light on this topic here. So
Thank you.
here's the thing. Here's the thing is that I always do like to counter the belief or expectation where people say, well, if I just completely let go, or if I just completely give myself over to trust that everything will work itself out and things will go my way and I will be rewarded for that. And I say, well, sometimes and sometimes not, that really what we're talking about is finding an inner resilience and trust and acceptance and open-heartedness, but that doesn't then determine what comes from outside, and that we still have to interact with other people and their beliefs and their ideas and their projections and their wants and their desires. And we're still operating in a world that contains a great deal of suffering and cruelty and injustice and all of these things. So that it's kind of it's just asking too much. And I always want, so this is one of my little catchphrases, as I like to say, like, look, God doesn't do requests and God doesn't pay favorites. So,
It's good.
because sometimes it's very egoic, right? This is like, well, if I become the right level of holiness, things will just work out for me and I will be supported. And people really, they sincerely have that belief. And then they
Yes.
don't understand, like, how come I'm not making any money? How come I can't pay my bills? And then it's like, well, what am I doing wrong? And then, well, maybe you're not working, you know, whatever it may be, that like you don't, there's a certain level of trust in letting go, but it doesn't override the fact that we still need to, as I crudely say, we still need to wipe our ass and brush our teeth, right? That these things don't just get taken care of for us. Because again, God doesn't play favorites, doesn't choose sides, and doesn't make requests or doesn't do requests. So, like, yeah, I want to give myself to the world in this way, and I hope that the world will support me back. Like, well, maybe not. Um,
So it's not a law. You don't think it's a law.
no.
You're more of the camp of the mother who goes to the priest and says, "My son is boxing Sunday, and can you pray for him?" And the priest says, "I'll pray, but it'll help if he can punch." You're saying
Yeah.
you got to be able to punch, or punch the time clock. Go to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't, no amount of holiness makes things happen ultimately. All right. I've really got to let Moxie out so she can go
Sure.
satisfy this barking urge.
So before we wrap up, um, let's just talk to someone out there that is going to maybe next week take the medicine. What would your advice be? Maybe in a week or in a month they're going to take it. What's your advice to get over their fears or any worries?
Um, First, I would say it's usual for people to have fear and anxiety, and that's okay. And it's actually a good opportunity to notice how, when you have fear, anxiety, or some level of anticipation or discomfort, that perhaps you might start to overthink things or overplan or over rationalize or over analyze, and then second guessing comes in. And there is a deep level of trust that is available within this experience. And that, like, if you've made the decision that you want to work with 5-MeO DMT, there's some deep part of you that heard about it and said, this sounds right for me. And then as the ego is confronted with that reality, it comes back with, oh, well, is it really right? Or have I done the right things? Or maybe not. Um, and so this part of this whole process of learning to get in touch with what really is authentic for you. Notice when the mind, when the ego tries to steer you away from what you've already decided is authentic for you. And that just because something makes you nervous or makes you anxious doesn't make it bad, doesn't make it wrong, and doesn't make it that's something that needs to be avoided. That there is a value in really allowing ourselves to go through kind of this confrontation with the self of, what am I really? What is reality really? And to pass through the eye of that expansion into the infinite. And then it becomes this gift that you've given yourself. And so, yeah, don't let your fear of what might happen or what might be get in the way of allowing yourself to experience. And also, I always like to call the people's very first experience with 5-MeO DMT. I always say, look, that's the diagnostic round. Really, that's what tells you where you're really at in life and where you really are in that moment. That because 5-MeO has the potential to override the ego completely, it means that it's interacting with our entire life history up until that very moment, of everything we've ever thought, everything we've ever believed, everything we've ever expressed or denied or repressed. So the potential for what might show up within the experience is very diverse for any given person. And that no matter what you've heard about other people's experiences, always understand that every experience is fundamentally unique. And your experience is going to be yours. And it's not about whether you did it right or did it wrong. Um, and I'd encourage people to focus on really allowing themselves to just authentically be with whatever arises within that state. So, like, if you feel you need to scream, scream. If you feel you need to take off all your clothes, take them off. If you feel you need to throw up, throw up. You feel like you need to pass into an endless orgasm of ecstatic bliss, do it. Embody it, feel it. Um, and that it is different for everyone, even if it might look the same from outside, like, oh, well, that person was peaceful and that person was peaceful, so they must have had the same experience. No, not necessarily. Or even things that from the outside might look really challenging and difficult or really horrific might be experienced from the inside as deeply cathartic and transformative. Um, so just know what you don't know, which means a lot, and allow yourself to trust that if you've called this experience into your field of something that you want to do, then I do encourage you to follow through, but also don't do it for anybody else. Just make sure you're doing it for you, not because somebody else wants you to or you think you should for some reason. It's got to be something that you want for yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you, Martin. And thanks for shining the light on these medicines. And I've been watching some shows with you know, Jesus healing people and healing the blind and all, you know, making the the limp or the people that can't walk. And the whole time I just symbolic, not that that can't happen. I've never seen it, but the true healing to me is this, like making, you know, this sitting with the medicine or sitting, and if you're lucky in 40 years you you transcend in meditation, but sitting with the medicine and actually seeing the truth. It's the real sacrament.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you and good luck with everything, and see you maybe next year.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on again, James. And it's been a pleasure to have this non-dual banter with you. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Take care. I'll see you, Martin.
All righty.
Bye bye.